For those that saw a video review on the auto deployment sheath for the Crkt PROVOKE that came from Black Bear Custom KYDEX, Micah made a video for me showing the process of how he makes his sheath, and today I'm going to share that with everyone.
So what I wanted to show you was essentially the process of forming a sheath for the PROVOKE. So what I do is I actually design, using a CAD program, I design all of my own vacuum molds. Not everything that I do is based on a vacuum mold. All of my custom products are generally that somebody sends me their knife, or if it's a knife I already own and it's a good, low tolerance for variation from a company like SE. For example, I know I can use an SE6 in my collection and it'll fit anybody else's SE6, something like that. Those I actually press with foam, but for what I would call featured products, things that I sell on my website store that are just pre-made and you just choose which thing you want, those are generally try to make a vacuum mold to do those because it's much more efficient in terms of time. So what you're looking at here is what I would call a butterfly mold or a split mold. And what that means is you have side A and side B all as one contiguous part. And with the exception of part of the relief blocking. Oh, I forgot I glued this in place. This piece here, this ramp, is relief blocking to allow for the geometry of the final product to be such that the knife can move in and out of the sheath comfortably. If it were just a vertical wall here, it would be very difficult to extract the knife. So yeah, this is a separate part. You can see the seam at the bottom, but I did glue it in place since there's no reason not to have it there. And essentially the process, sorry, I'm looking for some mesh. The process is this aluminum plate down here is my vacuum table. That is the hole the air gets pulled through, and the mesh is just to make sure that there's constant airflow all the way across the surface of the part within the rubber gasket perimeter. So I just have to make sure that the perimeter falls outside of where the mesh is on the table. And I know for sure that I'm not only going to get an airtight seal. Sorry, that's the heat press going off. I'm not only going to get an airtight seal around the bottom of the part, enclosing all of the holes. You can see all of the holes coming up through. But I'm also going to get a really strong pull on the top side. And part of how I design my molds is I put this little air moat around the top perimeter, and it actually falls just inside the bottom perimeter. So it's kind of a comprehensive process, and this whole gasket and air moat on the top concept is something that I believe I'm the very first person to use, at least in the KYDEX world. I've never seen it before. It was just something that occurred to me as a way to be able to form my stuff with smaller footprints of material. So it saves me a little bit on material. So that said, the piece of material that's heating up right now is just about finished. So what I'm going to do is pull it out of the press, and you'll see, I'm sure you're familiar enough with KYDEX to know that it's a thermoplastic, so you heat it up and it becomes malleable, and then as it cools, it hardens into its final shape, which will be essentially what you're looking at here. Backside is covered with grip hooks, and I'll discuss this in just a moment as well, because this is kind of important. All right, so here we go. You're going to actually get to see this. I'm going to lay the piece over, put the frame on it to isolate the air travel on the top, and then I'm going to use a foot pedal to kick the vacuum on. Let's go. All right. So what I'm looking for when I first initiate the vacuum is really crisp definition, which we have satisfied here. The sort of telltale most of the time is that on any vertical walls that have an actual 90-degree angle on them, oftentimes if the KYDEX is not quite hot enough, ergo not quite flexible enough, what'll happen is it'll have kind of a sloped effect where the vertical meets the horizontal, and that's just kind of a no-go. So I try to avoid that at all costs. And if that does happen, usually I immediately remove the piece, throw it back in the heat press, reheat it, maybe even overheat it so that I get the definition that I want, and then form it again. And occasionally, if your contour is too great, then it can actually permanently warp the KYDEX or stretch it out to a degree where it's not going to come back to a flat surface again, and therefore it's just trash. So you have to throw that away and grab a new piece of stock to work with. So, all right, it's cooled down to a point where having the vacuum on is no longer going to affect the form. And at this point I usually turn the vacuum off, remove the frame, and then I'll just hit it with a little bit of compressed air to manually cool it off. Sorry for the noise, by the way. But yeah, I'll just do this a little bit. That's my air compressor kicking on. And once I'm satisfied that the mold is cool enough for the KYDEX, it's no longer flexing on its own. It requires significant input from me to actually flex it. I'll slip in usually a ruler like this, just a framing square rather, and I'll pry the piece up off of the contours of the mold. So demolding is what that's called. And then you can see the underside of the KYDEX, and it's got these really nifty cone-shaped contours on them, which will allow me to get my drill bit to track perfectly into the center of those holes. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this out, and then I'll walk you through the next step. It's actually really fun. The next step is the best. All right, so the next step, once I've got it drilled out, is I have these machined trim jigs, they're called. And essentially what I do is I just fit it into the contour of the sheath, or the shell rather, and it kind of locks it in. It doesn't have any wiggle room. And so next I'll take a bandsaw and I'll trim just outside the perimeter of my trim jig, and then I'll come over here and trim route it. So let me trim this off camera on the bandsaw, and then I'll come back and show you the router trimming in just a moment. All right, so here we go. We're looking at the slightly rough hewn shape here, and now I'm gonna buzz it on my trim router. It's gonna be loud, so I would recommend you turn the volume down. And there we go. We have an absolutely perfect shaped footprint of the final sheath. So let's go back over to the vacuum table and I will show you the next step. All right, the next step is that I use what's called a strip heater. And this is typically, I think these were invented for bending acrylic, which is obviously another thermoplastic, but it works fantastic on KYDEX. So what I do is I basically kind of dwell over the hot point on the center line of my material, and I then fold it over. And this mold, I did it, it wasn't really necessary, but I did it for visual clarity. But I actually designed a little tiny ridge on the top of the mold, so it would give me just a barely visible center line that I could work with and ensure that I'm staying aligned with the strip heater. So I'm going to grab my 3 eyelets, these bigger holes down here, 1/4-inch holes. I put brass eyelets through, and then these are, I believe, 7/32 would be the size of the hole, so a little bit smaller. And this is just for all the regular hardware that I use. So let's see, let me make sure I've got all my stuff set up here properly. I end up using the eyelets as well as these blocks for just kind of pressing the edge closed, 'cause sometimes it's just a little difficult. I'll also put the actual knife into it when I fold it, so that helps to kind of register both halves of the sheath and guarantee that my geometry or that my fold is staying aligned. So, all right, let's heat her up. It's pretty important to actually remove it from heat. You don't want to stay on the heat too long. This KYDEX is a very, very easy material to burn, to scorch if you heat it up too quickly or too far. You can shock the material and cause unnecessary warping or stretching, as well as these kind of shiny spots to appear, which indicate that the material is reaching its critical temperature of around 420 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, at 420 and above, it actually begins to melt and gives off rather toxic fumes. So it's always obviously wise to avoid that. The strip heater, I haven't actually taken a temperature on. I have no idea what its temperature is at the moment. I'm just assuming it's probably, you know, 600 or 700 degrees, because it can really heat the KYDEX up quite quickly. I just go very, very slow in this process to make sure that I don't scorch the material. So, all right, we are ready. So I put the knife in, I make the fold like so, and then I actually will pop my eyelets in, and all of this just goes to help get perfect alignment. And then I put the edge on top of the upper block, and I use, or the lower block rather, and I use the upper block to just kind of squash in the edge and make sure that there's not a big gap in between the two layers. So where it folds, obviously any harder material, when you're creasing it, tends not to form a flat surface. You tend to get a little bit of a gap there, and too much of a gap would actually ruin the spacing and cause this to fail to perform its auto deployment feature. So we want to obviously keep that as tight as possible, and this is looking really nice. You do get this little tenting effect at the ends, but that actually, most of that will get shaved off on my subsequent step at the belt sander. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and flare those eyelets, and then I'm just going to touch up the edges to eliminate this curvature here. So this will all be one straight line, and then I'll also deepen this groove to get rid of this tent, and then I will buff the edges with a bench buffer and touch them up with a finishing grit sanding sponge to give it all kind of a homogeneous satin or matte finish. And then I'll come back on camera and show you the end product. All right, so I apologize for the lighting. I'm just now realizing the lighting's not great in this region of my shop, but let me kind of angle it so you see a little better. But yeah, this is the final thing, and obviously we'll add the tech lock on there. The tech lock can be carried on either side of the sheath at a variety of different angles. I think I have another video demonstrating that. Maybe I can send you the link to reference it if you need to. But yeah, essentially these two holes on this side and these two holes on this side are meant to accommodate a tech lock. Let me show you really quick if I can find this stupid thing. There we go. I keep the back half of a tech lock on hand to be able to show you. Basically, you can align it so this hole at this corner and the bottom center hole for a vertical carry, you can just turn it 90 degrees and you'll see it lines up perfectly for a horizontal carry. Or you can actually span the same two holes, or sorry, span across the 1.5 inch distance, so in line with any of the hole tracks, and get those same two holes on the sheath. It requires just a little bit of an outside distance, so the screw going through from the back will not look like it's going to perfectly align, but if you just lightly tighten one and then the other, you can tighten them all the way down and get it to work. So there you go, and of course auto deployment. So I hope you enjoy this, Steven, and hope your audience enjoys this if you choose to show it, and I'll send this out as soon as possible. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm splicing this in as an afterthought. I almost forgot about this one. So as you know from my website, you can see the sheaths are available on a tech lock. They're also available on a Matchpoint USA accessory mounting plate, which is my personal preferred carry option for this particular knife. And then I can also accommodate something like grip hooks, although I think currently really only works for a right-handed carry. But this is designed to be inside the waistband, and because it's inside the waistband, this customer has opted to have me disable the auto deployment feature for obvious reasons. I mean, you don't want that blade coming out right next to your skin. So I can make it with a nice secure hold, but where it does not deploy the blade as you draw. And that's an important distinction, obviously, between what most people will get outside the waistband or something inside the waistband. Now, the one exception I would say should be made for an inside the waistband with auto deployment would be if the customer were to choose something like what I would call an IWB tether sheath, and that would be with probably a KYDEX or maybe some other polymer, but it'd be some kind of clip that floats over the top of the waistband, but not the belt. And it would not have this little J hook on the back side of it. This is meant to grip the bottom of your belt so you get resistance as you pull up. So without that feature, how it would work is you would pull it and it would come, you would grab the ring and pull. The whole sheath would actually come out of your waistband, but there would be a paracord tether attached to your belt from one of the lower eyelets, or maybe both of them, and it would only be a few inches long. So once it's 3, maybe 4 inches away from your body, the tether would catch, and then as you draw, it would deploy the blade for you. So personally, if I were going to carry IWB with this knife, I would absolutely do it on a tether auto deploy sheath. So all right, well, that's all I've got for you. Sorry for rambling so long. I hope this was informative and fun, and like I said, definitely no pressure to use this for your audience, but if they would enjoy something like this, figured it'd be nice to provide you with the option, or at least to show you how the product is made. And it's kind of a fun process, so I'm passionate about it, obviously, and I love to share it. So
now I believe after everyone watching the process to build these sheaths, they can understand why I'm impressed with these and how much effort he puts into making these. I encourage you to go to his website, look at all the other products he has, like and subscribe to this channel, share this video, and we'll see you next time.